Welcome back, everyone. We're kicking off another deep dive, and today we're tackling something that's been making waves lately, content credentials.
Yeah.
Now, I know that might sound a little jargony,
Yeah.
but trust me, this stuff is relevant to all of us, especially in the age of AI and all the crazy things it can do.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And with AI becoming so good at creating, well, fake stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know, images, videos, audio,
Push fakes, right?
exactly, deep fakes, synthetic media, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
The line between real and fake is getting blurrier every day.
Yeah, I saw a stat that by 2027, up to 90% of online content could be synthetic.
That's right, 90%. Can you imagine that? It's going to be harder than ever to know what to trust.
90%. That's a wild thought. So how do we even begin to deal with that?
Well, that's where content credentials come in.
Okay, tell me more.
You can think of them like a digital fingerprint for media.
Okay.
Whether it's a photo, a video, a piece of music, whatever, it's basically a way to track the origin and history
Hmm.
of that content.
Like where it came from, who made it, and what edits have been made along the way.
Exactly. It's all about transparency. With content credentials, you could potentially see the entire life cycle of a piece of content.
That's pretty cool, actually. So it's not just about verifying if something is real, but also understanding how it came to be.
Absolutely. And, that's huge when you think about how easily AI can be used to manipulate media these days.
Right. Like imagine you're a photographer and someone uses your work to train an AI without your permission.
Exactly. Or let's say you're a musician and someone uses your song to create a new track using AI.
Would content credentials help in those situations?
They could, because with content credentials, you'd have proof that your work was the original source.
It's like a way to protect your creative work.
Exactly. It's about giving creators more control over their work in the digital age.
And it sounds like it could be useful for organizations too, right? Like, what about companies trying to combat ransomware attacks?
Oh, absolutely. With content credentials, they could potentially prove that their data was compromised,
Yeah.
which could be crucial in investigations.
So it's not just about individual creators, but it could have implications for cybersecurity and even law enforcement.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about crime scene photos being tagged with content credentials.
Tamper-proof evidence.
Exactly. It could revolutionize the way we handle evidence and ensure the integrity of sensitive information.
Wow, the potential applications here are huge. Now, I was reading about something called durable content credentials. What are those all about?
Right. So they're taking things a step further. They're adding things like digital watermarks and fingerprint matching to make the provenance information even harder to tamper with.
So even if someone tries to remove the metadata or alter the content, there's still a way to trace it back.
Exactly. They're basically trying to make it foolproof.
So how do these credentials actually work? What makes them so secure?
They use something called cryptography.
Cryptography.
Like complex math and algorithms. It basically creates a unique digital signature that can't be faked.
Okay, that sounds pretty technical, but I think I get the idea. It's like a digital signature for a document, but for any type of media. If someone tries to mess with it, the signature becomes invalid, right?
That's a great analogy. It's about creating that layer of trust and transparency in a world where it's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish real from fake.
Right, because if 90% of content online is going to be synthetic in a few years, we need some way to know what's real, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of trusting AI-generated content, have you heard about this phenomenon called model collapse?
Model collapse. I think I read something about that. Is that where the AI starts feeding on its own output and gets like dumber over time?
Exactly. That's a really simplified way to put it. But yeah, essentially, when AI systems are trained on data that's already been generated by AI, it can create a feedback loop where the quality of the output gets worse and worse.
Like a snowball effect, but in a bad way.
Right. But with content credentials, we could potentially track the origin of the data used to train AI models. So we could avoid feeding them data that's already been polluted by other AIs.
Okay, that makes sense. So content credentials could help ensure that the AI is being trained on reliable human-generated data.
Exactly. And this is important for anyone who works with AI or uses data sets.
Researchers, analysts, data scientists, the whole lot.
Absolutely.
So who's actually behind all of this? Is this just some niche tech idea, or are there major players involved in making content credentials a reality?
Oh no, this is definitely not a fringe idea. There are some big names pushing this forward. There's the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA for short, and the Content Authenticity Initiative, or CAI.
And what are these groups all about?
They're basically working to establish industry standards for content credentials. And they've got some serious heavy hitters involved, companies like Adobe, Microsoft, the BBC, Google, even Sony.
Wow, so this has some serious backing. That's impressive. It sounds like they're really trying to make this a mainstream thing.
They are. And get this, the C2PA specification is actually on track to become an ISO standard.
Hold on, an ISO standard, isn't that like the gold standard for global recognition?
It is. It means content credentials are being taken very seriously and are on their way to becoming a widely accepted framework.
That's pretty exciting. So it seems like content credentials are well on their way to becoming a major part of the digital world, but are there any challenges or roadblocks they need to overcome?
Well, for one, using them is still largely opt-in.
Meaning?
It means content creators have to actively choose to embed these credentials in their work. It's not mandatory yet.
I see. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
The more people use them, the more valuable they become, which then encourages more people to adopt them.
Exactly. But there are also technical challenges.
Like what?
Well, they've already had to address some early flaws, like issues with self-signed certificates.
Ah, so they're still ironing out the kinks.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. But both C2PA and CAI are actively working to improve the technology and address any vulnerabilities.
So for organizations that are looking to get on board with this, what are some of the key things they should be thinking about?
Well, first off, they need to figure out where content credentials fit into their workflow. Is it at the point of content capture, during editing, or right before publishing?
I guess that depends on their specific needs and the type of content they're working with.
Exactly. And then they need to think about how they're going to make it clear to their audience that their content is credentialed.
Right, like how will they display that information? Will they use website plugins or browser extensions?
Exactly. And then there were the more technical aspects, like how they'll securely store the media and the credentials.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but also about having the right infrastructure and processes in place.
That's exactly right.
Well, this has been a fascinating look at content credentials. It's incredible to think how something as seemingly simple as a digital fingerprint could have such a huge impact on the way we create, share, and consume information.
I agree. And while it's not a silver bullet, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
For sure. So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the limitations and potential downsides of content credentials.
Because no technology is perfect, right?
Exactly. We'll be back after a short break. All right, so we've talked about how powerful content credentials can be, but
Right.
as with any new technology, there are bound to be, limitations and maybe even some potential downsides.
Absolutely. No technology is perfect, and that includes content credentials.
Yeah. One thing that struck me when I was reading about all of this,
Yeah.
it seems like content credentials can tell us how something was made, but not necessarily why.
That's a really good point.
Right. Like we can verify where a piece of content came from and see how it's been edited, but understanding the intent behind it, that's a whole other can of worms, especially when you think about things like satire or misinformation disguised as humor.
You hit the nail on the head. Content credentials can give us a lot of technical information.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we still need to be critical thinkers.
Right.
We need to look at the context, consider the source, and use our own judgment.
So even with content credentials, media literacy skills are still crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't just blindly trust a nutrition label on a food product.
Yep.
You'd also consider where it came from, how it was processed, all of that.
That's a good analogy.
Right. Content credentials provide a valuable piece of the puzzle, but they don't tell the whole story.
Okay, that makes sense. And speaking of potential issues,
Yeah.
I was also thinking about what happens if the content that's been credentialed gets, removed from an archive or deleted.
That's a valid concern. It highlights the need for systems to preserve that chain of custody,
Yeah.
even if the content itself goes away.
Yeah.
We need reliable ways to make sure that information is still accessible.
So it's not just about embedding the credentials in the media. It's also about the infrastructure behind it all, the systems that support the whole content credentials ecosystem.
Absolutely. It all has to work together.
Okay, and what about the possibility of someone, tampering with the metadata itself?
Right. That's where those durable content credentials we talked about earlier can really make a difference.
Okay.
By adding digital watermarks and fingerprint databases, it becomes much harder to remove or alter the provenance information.
So even if someone manages to mess with the metadata, there's still a way to trace it back.
That's the idea. It's like having multiple layers of security to protect the integrity of the information.
Right. But are there any other
Hmm.
potential vulnerabilities or ways that content credentials could be exploited?
Well, I mean, no system is 100% foolproof. The C2PA specification, for instance, has already gone through some revisions.
Really?
Yeah, because some security flaws were found.
Ah, so it's an ongoing process.
It is. It's like a constant back and forth between the people developing the technology and those who might try to find ways to, exploit it.
Like a cat and mouse game.
Yeah, kind of. And that's why it's so important to have a community of experts involved.
Makes sense. More eyes on the problem, the better.
Exactly. The more people who are looking for potential issues, the more secure the system becomes.
Okay. So now I'm wondering, with all this talk about content credentials becoming more widespread,
Hmm.
is there a chance that, I don't know, maybe media without these credentials will eventually be viewed with more suspicion?
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
It's possible as content credentials become more common, it wouldn't be surprising if people started asking, well, why doesn't this content have a credential? What are they hiding?
Right. Like it could become a mark of trustworthiness, almost like a seal of approval.
Exactly. Which raises some really interesting questions about freedom of expression and privacy.
Oh, yeah. What about people who have legitimate reasons for not wanting to use content credentials?
Exactly. There are a lot of nuances to consider as this technology evolves.
That's a whole other discussion for another time.
For sure. But for now, I think the big takeaway is that content credentials are a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah.
They can help us navigate the digital world with more confidence.
Especially as AI-generated content becomes more and more prevalent.
Absolutely.
So where can our listeners go if they want to learn more about all this?
So if folks are interested in, diving deeper into this whole content credentials thing,
Yeah.
I'd say the best place to start is with the C2PA and CAI websites.
Okay.
They have a lot of good info there. Technical specs, blog posts, even case studies.
Cool. Anything else? Like, is there a way for people to connect with, I don't know,
Hmm.
other folks who are interested in this?
They actually have a Discord channel.
No way.
Yeah. It's a great place to chat with experts, ask questions, and just kind of geek out about content credentials.
A Discord for content credentials. That's amazing. I gotta check that out. I have to say, this whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I started out feeling a bit, overwhelmed by all the AI stuff.
I get that.
But honestly, I'm feeling pretty hopeful now.
That's great to hear.
It's inspiring to see the industry coming together to address these really complex issues.
Hmm.
And it's not just a tech problem, it's something that affects all of us.
Absolutely. It's about protecting truth and trust in the digital age.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So for our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic
Yeah, check out those resources.
and learn more about how content credentials can help you navigate this, well, sometimes pretty crazy digital world.
It's about empowering yourselves to make informed decisions about the information you consume.
Absolutely. So stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.